Thank you very much. I'm assuming you can hear me at the back fine? Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So I'm going to have essentially three parts to my presentation today. I'm going to start with a little bit of background about how do you tell when Agile projects aren't going well, because I was asked to include some of that. What are the warning signs, they call them the smells, that something's just not right. I'm going to take you through some statistics of Agile transformations, but statistics specifically of interest to people in the PMO area, right? We're looking at large transformations, portfolios of Agile projects. Now that there's enough of these going on, companies are beyond, for the most part, testing the waters, their first couple Agile projects. Some organizations have now run hundreds of Agile projects. So what are some of the metrics and data that's starting to emerge about people that are at higher levels of Agile maturity, and how does that play into how we proceed? And then I'm going to a little surprise for at the end. So I'm going to start with what are some of the signs that Agile projects are in trouble. So really, they're broken down into three areas. The first category of problems are problems with team engagement. People are just not working together effectively as a team. If you take the time to read the Agile Manifesto, the very first line of the Agile Manifesto talks about team engagement. It's more important to have the right people working effectively together, collaborating, working in an open, transparent model. No handoffs, no silos, things don't fall through the cracks. If you have them collaborating effectively together, you'll be far more successful than worrying about whether you got the right methodology or tools. So it's that important. So we're going to talk about some of the problems, the early warning signs that the teams just aren't getting engaged properly. The second one is if you do Agile in a structured, disciplined way, which is what I've been teaching since the early 2000s. Since I started teaching Agile in the late 90s, it was kind of fast and loose at the beginning, and then we quickly realized as Agile moves into the large enterprises, you need rules, you need structure, you need governance. So how do we have the appropriate amount of governance but still allow the teams to be flexible and adaptive? So there is process, there is structure, there's certain activities that should be taking place. If they're not, or they're not taking place effectively, then problems start to happen. So there's a bunch of early warning signs that people just aren't following the rules of Agile properly. And then there's just general performance problems. People just aren't getting the results. They're not getting the efficiencies and the productivity enhancements that we're looking for. So I'll look at each of those. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this. I'm just going to talk through what are some of the key warning signs and give you a couple suggestions as to what might be the root cause. But obviously, every one of these could be a much more involved discussion. So team engagement. If people aren't showing up for those daily scrum meetings, the daily stand-up meetings, those daily team meetings, that's usually a warning sign that something's not right. Often people feel they're being micromanaged. And they're being micromanaged because, frankly, the meetings aren't being run properly. If you run them properly the way they were intended and people have a little bit of understanding about why you're running these meetings, you'll get much more active engagement. People feel it's a status reporting meeting, especially if you get a manager or a boss or the product owner showing up in the daily scrum meeting. It's no longer a group of peers helping each other solve problems. It becomes a management status reporting meeting on a daily basis, and they don't see the value in it. So one of the problems, or sometimes they're taking too long because they're not being crisply facilitated. There's a number of causes, but if they're not being run properly, the teams will start to distance themselves and not engage in the process. Right? Some people think that the meeting isn't for them, it's for the PM. As I said, they feel micromanaged. And often that's because of bad practice. Some of the early training that we gave people on how to run these daily scrum meetings back in the 90s has changed. Best practices have evolved, but people are still teaching the old techniques. Some of you are probably doing these techniques today, right? The very first question in the daily scrum meeting, there's 3 questions. What's the very first question? Anybody?
What have you done today?
Yeah.
What are you going to do tomorrow?
Okay, no, not quite. The one's about the past, one's about the present, one's about the future. What's the one about the past? What did you do yesterday? Now, think about it. You're a team member. You're busy. You'd rather be coding or doing something more fun than sitting in this meet or standing in this meeting. And the first question they ask you is, what did you do yesterday? Now, if we're holding this meeting every 24 hours, you're getting frustrated because what's the second question you were asked yesterday, the question about the present? What are you going to work on today? They'll say, I told you yesterday. Weren't you paying attention? Right? It's not a useful question. So it's bad practice that we're following. We've emerged over the years. We've come up with better questions. The better question than what did you do yesterday is, did you have any problems getting it done? Because that's a daily opportunity to ask for help. Daily issue identification. People can ask for help right there in the meeting and get it resolved. So people are following old practices, aren't really staying with the times and the new research and the evolving practices, and that causes problems. People get frustrated. Sometimes we have overly specialized roles. Now, sometimes you can't help it. You're in a unionized environment, or you've got very crisp role definitions, and we're going to have some handoffs. Agile expects something called generalizing specialists, right? We should all have our specialty. I'm the Cisco router configuration guy. You're the database architect. Everybody has their specialized role, but we're also all team members. And there's some things we can help each other out with. Maybe I don't have the skill to do your job 100%, but maybe I can help you with some documentation, or I can double check your work, or do some extra help the testers with some testing. There's something I can do. So the idea is if we look at for the overlaps between our roles, we can help each other out. It builds more high-performance teams, more team bonding. Right? Testers not being part of the development team. Now, it's very common for separation of duties that testers have to report into a separate manager. And this is all because something really nasty that happened in one of our banks. I won't say which one because you have employees here. But back in the first half of the 1980s, a developer and a tester used to report up into the same manager. The developer wrote some code. The tester double-checked it before it goes live in production. They sat beside each other. They reported in the same manager. The manager was like, hurry up, it's got to go live, it's got to go live now. What are you doing? What do you mean it needs more testing? And just put it live, and stuff got into production that shouldn't have, with too many Sev1 defects. It actually made the papers because the systems went down for some period of time. And then 2 years later, at the same bank, a tester and a developer conspired to put some code into production that skimmed some money and rerouted it to a certain account. Now, they got in a lot of trouble. They didn't go to jail because the bank didn't want it in the papers, but they got fired pretty quick, and new processes were put in place that the testing group had to report separately than the development group, which makes sense. Separate managers, separate controls. That's the role of testers as the protectors of production. Their role is to protect the production environment from nasty things. But we need to know the thing works even before it gets to that team. Right? This is that independent separate QA team that does independent systems integration testing or production verification testing. We need some QA to happen before it gets to that point because you don't want to be finding defects that late in the production process. So how about lending a couple of those testers to the development team? Now you have people assisting the developers with a testing mentality who can make sure that things built right the first time. Then when it gets thrown over to the fence to the second manager for its independent QA run, some of those testers can go with it and explain the as-built system to the other testers so they're not writing test cases based on outdated documentation or misunderstandings. And it overall speeds up the process. You still have the separation of duties, but if they can help out a little bit during the development phase, wonderful magic happens in terms of performance and productivity. Right? Also, a lot less faster turnaround for fixing defects. We did something at CIBC where we had the testers and the developers. They were on separate buildings. We had them sit on the same floor and intermingled them, even in adjacent cubicles. So you had like tester, developer, tester, developer intermingled. And wonderful stuff happens. A developer would be writing some code, think he's done, and it'd say to the tester, this is what the requirements were, right? Make sure they come to an agreement before he throws it over to testing. If there's a discrepancy, fix it then. The testers are finding defects. They turn to the developer. This is a defect, right? Developers know it's built, that's the new spec, it got changed. Oh, okay. And they avoid documenting and retesting and all this inefficiencies by communicating directly. The tester has a problem, they can show it to the developer. The developer doesn't have to figure out how to reproduce this defect. They can look at it right there on the screen when the tester has it. Says, oh, okay, I get it. And they can go fix it right away. So it dramatically speeds up the process. Poor teaming overall, people pointing fingers, blaming, right? Often that's a problem of the high-performance team culture not working. Sometimes there's a team member who dominates the rest. Their way is the right way, their way is the only way. Right? That's a sign that you've got problems with team engagement. People not showing up for the lessons learned or the retrospectives. What could be going on there? Well, they're afraid of getting blamed. If they take too long, people aren't seeing that you're actually acting on any of this. We sit around and talk about what we could have done better, and then nobody actually goes and takes action on it. Right? So they're saying, why? What's the point? Right? So these are some of the problems with the processes not being followed properly to get full proper engagement. Now there's also problems, early warning signs that Agile projects aren't going well when we're looking at the rhythm of the team getting interrupted, the rhythm or the pace or the cadence of delivery. No matter how long your iteration is, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, you get into a pattern of regularly delivering at that cycle. You get better at estimating that length of time. You're naturally wrapping up your work when the iteration's about to end. People just get so much better at fitting into that cadence after a couple iterations worth of time. All of a sudden now when we're not able to maintain that rhythm, that's a sign that something's wrong. Maybe we're getting into work that's harder than we thought, somebody's not performing appropriately, or sometimes there's other issues. We're delivering our code so late in the iteration, there's not time left to test it. So we get to the end of the iteration and nothing's done, nothing's ready to demo. Now you find us building in iteration 1 but testing it in iteration 2 while we're building some other stuff, and the rhythm starts to get broken. The feedback cycles break down. Lack of standards. Agile talks about the concept of collective ownership of the deliverables. It's not my piece and your piece and her piece. It's all of our work. So we can touch any little pieces we need to get the next feature done. But that only works if we're all following consistent standards. If we're not, it becomes a mess really quickly. Lack of process improvement. The lessons learned isn't actually being implemented. I talked about that already. Our productivity isn't accelerating. And it should in Agile projects. You should see productivity improve rather rapidly. And if it's not, you're not taking advantage of the tools that are in Agile. Business stakeholders not being adequately involved in the project. This is a recipe for disaster. Agile projects facing high levels of change need the business to help steer the project and keep it on course with the changing business needs. If the business isn't there to help steer this project in the right direction, it could go far off in the wrong direction for far too long until there's a huge mismatch or a huge gap. So if you're seeing the executives aren't involved, this could lead to huge issues as well. Right? So we need more frequent involvement. I did a study for IBM where we compared 2 identical projects. They were the same project just for 2 different clients. One was Agile, one was done in a waterfall way, and we actually did an activity-based costing module where everybody coded their time differently, including the business. We got the business stakeholders to code their time to the system as well in exchange for a hefty discount. And what we found was the amount of business involvement in the Agile project is the same as the waterfall project. It's essentially the same. It's just spread out differently. The waterfall project, you need tons of business time at the beginning to get everybody on the same plan, same set of requirements, everything else. Once the team gets started, the business involvement drops off and then ramps up again at the end when you're trying to get reviews and sign-offs. Agile just takes that heavy upfront part and spreads it out throughout the project at a much lower level but over a longer period of time. It's not necessarily more hours, they're just spread out differently. So if the business isn't getting involved and having those regular touch points, nobody's steering the ship and we're going in the wrong direction potentially. Too much business pressure to get things done faster, to slip one more thing into the iteration, to change their minds mid-iteration about what they want you to work on. Now, sometimes a disaster happens and you have to reset or change directions, but if it's happening frequently, that means they're not respecting the planning process. Maybe your iterations are too long. They can't leave you alone for 4 or 5 weeks. They need to interfere a bit more quickly. Maybe you need shorter iterations. There could be many corrections for that. Sometimes they don't understand the impact of their interruptions. So by educating them better about what the impacts are, they can scale back a bit. External stakeholders tinkering with your project. It's the same as the business pressures, right? Same issues. You can deal with those. And I guess maybe one of the more important ones is how do we know when we're done? Often we have completely different visions of what we were supposed to be doing, and you end up with people arguing over whether something is in scope or not, or whether we need to add some more features. So Agile has some particular practices to try and clarify that very quickly, more formally define what done looks like before you start, so that we don't have these surprises later on, so that we don't get these discrepancies. Certainly the visual modeling techniques and things like that that are used in Agile often help get people on the same page very fast. Collaborative group estimating, planning processes help everybody get on the same page. There's lots of Agile practices that help fix this. And I guess this last one is sort of this push versus pull concept, the PM assigning work rather than the team taking on work themselves. Certain tasks have a natural owner. Right? There's certain people on the team, that's the only person with that skill. Assign them those tasks. That makes sense. But if there's tasks that multiple people can do during an iteration, don't assign them necessarily. Give everybody one to start with and leave the rest unassigned where a pool of people could pull from them. This avoids another problem. The problem that your experts get their job done quickly, they're across the finish line, and they just sit there and my work's done and just wait while everybody else stumbles and struggles and fails. The more people that fail, the better I look. Right? Well, so if you don't assign all of the work, as soon as somebody's done their first task, they look back, is there anything else on the list with nobody's name on it? Yeah, okay, I'll take the next one. They put their name on it, they start working on that one, and so on. And what you'll find is that the people that are working harder, faster, your more skilled, more experienced resources may get a little bit more work done than the others, but everybody will meet the commitment. And the ones that aren't pulling their weight, it very quickly highlights who's not doing as many tasks as the others and there's peer pressure involved and other things. That problem quickly usually gets resolved. Either they leave the team or they smarten up and step up to the plate and work harder. And lastly, there's this generic overall performance issues that we find on some Agile projects. Team's not making progress. They're struggling. They're churning. Iteration after iteration goes by, and they don't seem to be ever getting done. I've seen Agile projects that were supposed to be a year long, and they call me in to help turn it around 2.5 years into the project. Right? That's a sign that something just isn't right. Your iteration burn down charts, which are supposed to show a solid, regular progression of work getting completed, are jumping up and down like crazy. What's going on? We're uncovering tasks that we'd missed. Sometimes the sponsor sneaking in an extra feature partway through the iteration and the work remaining jumps up. Things jumping all over the place is not a good sign. Jumping up too high, you added some work. If it jumps down too much, you probably had to descope something. Right? That's a sign of instability. They should be much more stable and predictable. If the team commits to doing 10 things and they never seem to get 10 things done, they're always getting 6 or 7 or 8, what's the problem? Well, either they're biting off too much, they're bad estimators, or more likely they're not using what's called the velocity calibrated iteration commitment, which means we keep saying we plan on doing 10 things, but maybe if I can only achieve 6 last iteration, I shouldn't be asking for 10 more. Maybe I should just ask for 6 because I know that's achievable. So using your actual metrics to better adjust your forecast as you go forward. Right? That's another sign. Or maybe your iterations are just too short. The team's good at estimating 4 months worth of stuff, or sorry, 4 weeks worth of stuff, but they're not including the testing effort. So the developers are getting their stuff done in 4 weeks, but there's no time for the testers. So either you go to a 5-week iteration or ask the developers to estimate 3 weeks worth of work so there's time for the testers. We need to adjust. The concept of technical debt keeps growing. Technical debt there's 2 things that contribute to technical debt. One of them is defects that didn't get fixed in the iteration when you actually built the stuff, so it wasn't done. Remember I said the definition of done is that it's finished, it's completed. So you got something built, but you couldn't quite debug it and polish it and get it all cleaned up and ready for real life. That's one source of technical debt, something that has to be deferred to some future point in time when you deal with it. And the other one is refactoring opportunities to tweak something to make it perform better or be prettier or easier to maintain, or often it's an adjustment for non-functional type requirements. That's called refactoring. That's another source of technical debt. And over time, this stuff starts to pile up and snowball. It gets bigger and bigger. The longer you leave it like real debt, it compounds. And at some point, it'll get so big, you can't build new stuff until you deal with some of the debt. So a technical debt pile that keeps growing and growing and growing is a sign that you may have a quality problem. Certainly, you're not getting stuff done. Maybe your iterations are too short. Maybe you need some test automation to help you catch up with some of this testing effort so you can focus more on getting these defects corrected. Right? There's a number of issues there that we need to look at. So those are some of the early warning signs that an Agile project might be going in the wrong direction. That was one of the things I promised to deliver today. Another one was some statistics about what's really going on in the world out there. As larger enterprises start to adopt Agile and we're getting more real results, what are some of the early indicators? Well, portfolio management overall is becoming more popular. Agile or not, more organizations are using portfolio management. A couple different studies, one from PM Solutions and one from PMI, different results, but both showing a significant percentage of organizations are actually using portfolio management to help their organizations. And there is more portfolio management growth expected. It's catching on. Not only are a majority of organizations using portfolio management, many more are considering to bringing it on within the next year or so. And in those portfolios are a significant portion of Agile projects. Right? There's lots of different methodologies being used, but Agile's catching on. Notice that traditional waterfall type approaches are in the minority. This has been a trend going on now for many years. It started in 2009 that we saw Agile actually supplant waterfall projects. Now, admittedly, this study was done by Dr. Dobbs' journal. It's a bias towards senior managers, senior experienced employees in large enterprises in the IT function. So it's an IT biased view. If you look at non-IT industries, the picture might look very different. But these are IT portfolios. Agile is currently, looks like, might be the dominant methodology, surprisingly. And regardless of whether they're using Agile now, 86% of teams have tried Agile, most of them successfully. Right? Whether they're using it dominantly or not in their organization, there's been pilots and most of them were successful. So Agile is not a fad. It's here to stay. I bet you pretty much everybody in this room is here because your organization's using Agile. It's not software startup companies with 20 employees that are just using Agile. It's banks, insurance companies, government, utilities, right? It's mainstream now in all industries. In fact, the largest growth in Agile right now is outside of IT. It's being used in engineering and construction, business transformation, mergers and acquisitions where two companies are going to merge together and tomorrow everybody's got a new boss and new policies and procedures. It's being used in all kinds of R&D industries, right, where there's hardcore research in the drug and pharmaceutical industries and other areas. The growth of Agile now is outside of IT. Look at the number of industries using Agile. Sure, IT is still the largest group, but look at all the other industries now that are using Agile. Pretty much everybody. Don't worry about taking pictures. I'll send you copies of the slides if you'd like. And look at the size of the companies. It's not just small companies using Agile. Companies of all sizes are now jumping in and trying it out and using and getting the value from this. It's pretty well distributed, pretty evenly distributed. Out of groups that have adopted Agile or made an attempt to, most of them have had success or some success. Some aren't sure yet. Still, the jury's still out. Out of the group that's neither, there was a further question done. How come you don't know yet? Is the results too muddy? Some said, well, we're not sure. It doesn't seem to have made a difference in cost or quality, but it was our first Agile project. There's obviously a learning curve. You're not going to see all the benefits right off the bat. But some of the other ones said it's too early to tell. We're in the middle of our first Agile project. So there is a significant 40% of the data was unclear because it was perhaps too early to tell if they'd get the results. But certainly there is some great success, and pure failures are quite small. And why are people bringing Agile in? Why are companies using this more and more? Because it works. If it's done right, it works. They get results. There's a lot of Agile failures because people aren't doing it right. But as you can see from the earlier slide, most organizations are seeing success, far more than those who are not. And here's the kind of benefits they're seeing. Now, in this particular study, they talked about results and return on investment, quality, stakeholder satisfaction, etc. And people were asked to rate on a scale of -10. In other words, this item was negatively impacted by their methodology, to +10, whether it was positively impacted by their methodology. And you see the differences between teams that are using Agile or teams that are using other methods. And in all of these categories, Agile had better performance based on the team's own measurements, their own assessments. Return on investment because it focuses on efficiency and getting some business benefits faster. Quality because Agile tests and retests so much. Earlier testing, more continuous testing drives better quality for sure. Stakeholders are more satisfied because they're engaged now as part of the project team, helping steer that project in the right direction. Team morale's better because they're actually getting some results. Imagine if you had an 18-month project. That's a long time to go before you know if you're successful or not, because we don't test till the end on a waterfall project. You're going at it for a year and a half before you see any fruit of your labor. But on an Agile project, you might break that into 18 one-month delivery cycles. And every month you're getting something done and tested and you're seeing results, you're feeling them, you're making a sense of progress, you're getting congratulated on getting through the harder stuff earlier in the project. There's a lot of significant morale building activity going on there just by switching to an Agile delivery mode. And delivery times can be faster because I don't have to wait 18 months to have anything to show for it. I could take part of that and release it sooner. You don't have to wait for the whole deliverable. There may be some earlier portion of deliverable that may be of some utility to you that you can get out there faster. Okay. If you look at team size, Agile, people say Agile only works on small teams. Well, that's not true either. If you look at all the methods, they're being very successful in all different kinds of team sizes. And if you compare it, it's among the highest across all different methodologies. Agile scores very well, certainly a lot better than waterfall. Right, so regardless of team size, we're seeing success. So what are some of the lessons learned from Agile deployments? Well, the Gartner Group has been talking about years we need to have something called bimodal IT. What's bimodal IT? Gartner's saying, well, you need waterfall and Agile in your organization. You need both modes of delivery to be able to hit most kinds of projects. There's a spectrum with Agile at one end, waterfall at the other, and most projects fall somewhere in between. Genexus, my consulting organization, has been talking for years now about, I guess you could call it tetramodal IT. There's 4 delivery approaches. It's not just waterfall Agile. There's iterative, there's incremental, there's other options. And if you know what the 4 options are, you can fine-tune to the nature of the project that you need. You can adjust your methodology. My assistant Lior is here. Lior, put up your hand. See her afterwards, give her your business card. She'll send you a link to a video that explains these 4 different approaches and how to choose the right approach for a given project. Right? Agile is significant. People are using it. Not every project should be Agile, though. You shouldn't approach every project in your organization as Agile or not. It's not the silver bullet that's going to solve everything. You're going to need a range of options in your organization. We did a study, 65% of projects weren't using the optimal delivery strategy. Right? We assessed a large number of companies, a large number of projects, and 65% of them were not using the right approach. So if you learn about these other approaches, you can adapt. You can choose the right approach for your project. In adopting Agile, here's a quick win. They did some studies about whether things were strategic or not, at certain practices, whether they were strategic and whether they were easy to implement or not. Agile management practices were highly strategic and easy to implement. That's a quick win. Change your project management practices to be Agile. That's more important than maybe trying to change your culture or adopting new tools. Right? Management practices will get you very quick wins. Technical practices, well, they're a little bit harder to do and not quite as strategic. They're okay. And here's one, low strategic importance, worrying about using your tools in an Agile manner. Right? It's harder to do than you think. Doesn't have a lot of strategic value. Don't worry about it. Focus on the project management side. That'll be your quick wins. Agile works in regulatory environments, regardless of what those environments are, whether they're CMMI, ISO 9000 sort of self-imposed regulations, or if there's privacy or life-critical type regulations, whatever those regulatory environments are, Agile works, and it's being used successfully in those worlds. So it's not just for the easy stuff. When you're adopting Agile, some of the biggest barriers, being measured with non-Agile metrics. PMOs, you got to change how you measure the success of projects, or you're going to force them to keep 2 sets of books. And that's certainly slowing down the project. Or Agile teams trying to integrate with non-Agile teams is somewhat of a challenge. There are practices around that in the program management area, right, if they're interrelated teams. But from a portfolio management side, if they're sharing resources across multiple projects, some Agile, some not, scheduling becomes a nightmare. When integrating with non-Agile teams, look at the most significant barriers. What's at the top of the list? The PMO. Right? You guys got to change how you track, how you manage, how you share, how you assess, how you audit projects to allow a bit more flexibility, and they're going to be far more successful. Okay, keys to success. Out of this survey, they asked people what are the top strategies IT teams use to stay out of trouble. The top 5, the green ones, are Agile techniques. Right? Whether you're Agile or not, these techniques work, and they're used across all different kinds of projects. So Agile practices work. Accelerators. What makes Agile projects even better? Environmental accelerators, having a single team, not spread across multiple projects, but one unified team. Having business people around. Having an Agile environment to work within, having the organization set up for Agile with the right levels of management supervision and metrics and everything else. A COE is nice, but not critical. What about management and governance accelerators? Well, certainly addressing the barriers to Agile, that will help quite a bit. Biggest one is effective executive sponsorship. If we can get the right sponsor with the right attitude, the right level of power, the right approach, then we can move mountains if we need to. And a business focus on getting value created quickly more than anything else will definitely help a lot. Governance, not as important as you think. It helps, but I'd rather have the right executive, and the hell with the governance, I'll get far more effective project. Now, I've got 3 minutes. 3 minutes?
1 minute. You've got 3 minutes.
3 minutes, and I'll share a quick story about 3 banks. This is my little surprise. I've helped pretty much all the Canadian banks now. I either helped in the past or I'm in the process of helping pretty much all the major Canadian banks with their Agile methodologies and Agile transformations. Here's some quick little stories. I won't mention names, but you might be able to guess who they are. So here's one. Bank number 1. Their strategy was, they're a major bank. They were the first one to adopt Agile. They were the first one out the gate. The team that owned the waterfall method decided they were going to develop an Agile method. They spent lots of time gathering their information, building their methodology, training, strong executive sponsorship. They basically said, my boss is more powerful than your boss, so when it came time for deployment, they just forced it on everybody. Now, lots of resistance, as you can imagine. They're stepping all over people's toes. Other groups are saying, what about my governance functions? What are you doing to us? And there was tons and tons of resistance. So there was rapid deployment, but very slow adoption, very slow upkeep. Lots of resistance, lots of politics. You could say it was a royal mess. Now, eventually, they got me in to help them. We brought in the governance teams because they didn't address governance at all. And we had enterprise architecture, info security, gating, all those people. We got them in and said, how is this going to work in your environment? And made sure that their needs were addressed by this methodology. And then the rollout went much smoother, but still not very quickly because people remembered the chaos and the problems from earlier. At that point, people were already burned, so they were a little bit shy about moving forward. Here's another bank. A very different approach. This bank said, we're going to have a grassroots team. Forget executive involvement. We got a very weak executive support. Let's just get a bunch of people together who work on the methodology side, build an Agile methodology, and try and get this rolled out across the bank. What they found was without executive support, nobody felt obliged to help them. And the thing dragged on and went on for years. Tons of resistance, but they slowly overcame these different resistance pockets, brought them on board, and with my help, eventually finished the Agile methodology, got it blessed and approved and rolled out. But by then, their sponsor had left the bank. The new person came in and said, well, I didn't start that initiative. Why would I support it? So without executive support, it was a very slow release and a very slow rollout because nobody felt compelled. And the last story was a different bank that took a different approach. They learned from all the other banks first. They did a survey of the other banks, talked to them. What have you found with this Agile thing? What were your problem points, and let's learn from it. They took a very deliberate strategic approach. They had strong executive sponsorship, but they got all the governance people lined up first, made sure all their needs were met before they even started rolling it out. They didn't let just everybody use Agile. They said you had to apply for permission to use Agile, so we make sure you have the appropriate kind of training, the appropriate mentoring and coaching to make sure you succeed. So those first Agile projects were huge successes with all the support that they got, so those people could go out and infect other project teams. And over time, the Agile is spreading, and they're still going through their Agile transformation now. Slower startup, much slower deployment, but highly successful. So 3 different banks, completely different deployment approaches, very different results. Same culture, same industry, same levels of competence, but just the strategy made all the difference. Okay, so I have some time for questions. Yeah, we have a question.
Hi, thank you very much for all the insights.
Thank you.
Great presentation, thank you. Question, how important is colocation?
I have some slides on that. I didn't bring them. Colocation is interesting. Regardless of what methodology you use, having people working side by side, face to face, dramatically speeds up performance. Whether you're Agile or waterfall, colocation is a good thing. For years we talked about having people in a war room or something like that when a project gets in trouble. Why? Because you don't have to document as much. You don't have to write a report and email it to somebody and wait for them to read it. You can say, hey, look over my shoulder. Is this what you were talking about? Yeah, okay. And then right away you get to work. It's an accelerator. As soon as you're not co-located, you're in other buildings, now everything takes a little bit longer because I have to try and get a hold of somebody on the phone. It may take 4 or 5 calls to find them, or send them an email. I got to wait till they read it and send information back. It slows us down. And it's worse when you're global because you can't pick up the phone and call them because you're on different time zones. Sometimes it just doesn't work. So co-location, regardless of whether you're Agile or waterfall or something in between, dramatically speeds up your project. It's a good accelerator, but you don't have to be co-located to be Agile. And if you are working with distributed teams, use the tools that are available to us to accelerate our communications. Instant messaging, web whiteboarding, easily doing desktop video conferencing. I keep telling people a $20 webcam and a free Skype account and you can talk face to face with somebody on the other side of the world. That's a huge performance booster. Excellent question.
When is a project eligible for Agile and when should it not be?
Okay. Good question. So to greatly simplify it, I think there's big chunky questions that need to be answered first. I think the most important one is this a high change project or not? If the scope is stable and well understood and you're not expecting a lot of changes, maybe Agile, you're not going to get a lot of benefits from all the overhead of Agile. But if you expect the scope to change a lot, we're expecting a lot, maybe a fuzzy scope, or you're expecting the sponsor to change their minds, or the technology is unstable and new and we got to do some experimenting, anything that can cause change, then Agile could be the right choice. But that's the first question I would ask. The second question is, what's my delivery strategy? Am I going to deliver this all at once at the end? Or am I going to deliver it in chunks, phases, waves? If I want phased delivery in a high change environment, Agile's probably my only choice. If it's big bang in a high change environment, you might use iterative or another method. The third thing that I think matters is the need for enhanced quality. There's testing in every methodology, but some of them are more testing focused. There's much more focus and time and effort spent on testing, like incremental methods and Agile methods. So if you have a need for exceptional quality in a high change environment, Agile would be an excellent choice. So those are the chunky questions I think of first. But then, even if that sort of leads you towards an Agile path, there's more nuanced questions. Is the team been trained on Agile? That one may make the difference. Is the business willing to work in an Agile way, have that more regular involvement throughout? Are they willing to tolerate some ambiguity? Are they willing to work in a collaborative fashion and not point fingers and blame? There's all these cultural elements we have to ask. So if you ask Leora really nicely, she'll send you something called the Agile Triage Checklist, which is a list of about 30 questions in 3 different areas you need to ask to really understand the subtleties of whether Agile, will apply in your scenario or not. Okay, good, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, Kevin. You indicated that metrics was another piece that needed to be taken a look at for Agile. Could you tell us a bit more about maybe a couple metrics that are significantly different from a portfolio standpoint when we start talking about Agile?
Sure, excellent question. So one of the traditional metrics we measure our projects in is percent complete, right? But percent of what? It means different things to different people. Percent of budget, percent of effort, percent of tasks, percent of deliverables. It could mean all kinds of different things. So traditional project management solves that or tries to solve that using earned value. Excellent practice. If we can't agree what percent complete means, we can at least agree on what a dollar is. So we measure everything in dollars, right? Dollars of value delivered versus dollar values planned to be delivered by this point in time. And we can come up with some really interesting metrics to use to forecast the end date, for example, quite accurately. The problem is the earned value is all based on that S-curve, the budgeted cost of work scheduled, right? The baseline plan. And in Agile, we're in a high change environment. That thing's flapping around like a flag on a windy day. So what are you comparing to? It's no longer useful for forecasting. You can do the Agile, the earned value metrics, but they fall apart very quickly. They're effectively unreliable. Agile can build earned value type curves using something different called velocity. Another Agile metric, but if your iterations are time boxed and you measure it diligently and you're really good and crisp about the project management side of Agile, the disciplined approach to Agile, you'll get some really good velocity metrics that you can use to simulate the earned value experience. It's not the same, it's a different calculation, but it can be used for the same purposes for forecasting budget and schedule at completion with a fair degree of accuracy. That's just one example. There's other metrics as well around business value delivered and things like that. There's all kinds of quality metrics that come out of Agile that you don't get in Waterfall because Waterfall tests once at the end. Agile's constantly retesting as we go through so we can get different kinds of metrics and do different things with them. Excellent, thank you.
Thanks. We have time for one more question.
You've been patient at the back.
I wanted to ask you about dedicated resourcing where Agile is concerned. How important do you think is dedicated resourcing to Agile in an organization?
Excellent question. How important is dedicated resources? Well, heck, that's important for any project in any organization, regardless of what approach you're taking, for the ability to maintain the knowledge, to build good, strong, solid teams. If you're constantly changing resources, you never get a good, solid team built. So regardless of your methodology, a dedicated team is awesome if you can get it. But often some resources are going to be multitasking and things like that. But if you can maintain the consistency of that core group of people, you're going to be far better off than if your team is a revolving door. Obviously, in Agile, we're trying to build higher levels of performance, higher levels of engagement, more intense, focused delivery. It becomes even more essential that we have focused people on the team. You can get by with some multitasking people on the team. Obviously, we have to in this environment. But at least try to keep those people, the same people, consistently as best as you can on the project. Not every resource, but the core group, as best you can. You'll get better results than if they're constantly changing. And I know we're out of time, but this lady's been waiting so patiently. She had her hand several times up. Rachel, your question.
I was actually going to ask the same question about dedicated resources.
Okay.
But perhaps I just ask a follow-up question.
Sure.
On that. So in order to ensure success of Agile, I mean, the third bank that was able to do it successfully, so did they have to do any organizational changes?
Absolutely. In fact, they saw the cultural differences in Agile, the cultural changes that are needed to succeed, as being very desirable in an institution that has been burned by taking risks in the past, and now the pendulum has swung too far in the anti-risk direction that they're no longer effective. So they saw these Agile projects as being ones where encouraging better collaboration, better performance, that will accelerate productivity, and hoping that those people will work on non-Agile projects next and infect the waterfall teams with this different cultural attitude, this different way of working. Okay.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.